just want to use only voice?
Yeah, I don't want the video. Where's the mute? How do I mute this? Oh, okay.
Good morning. Hi. Can you see me?
Oh.
No, you don't. Now you do? Okay. Good morning. Welcome to this webinar. We are still waiting for a few people. I'm here. Quite many of you are already inside the webinar, which is good. So mind that I would wait other minutes before starting.
Oh, just want to test my voice and then I'm going to mute my microphone.
Of course, this is Margaret, no?
Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
Margaret.
Okay.
Very well. Thank you very much.
Now I'm going to mute. Okay.
Yeah, great. Okay. Yeah, okay. So Margaret, I wanted to make up and maybe. So we are Margaret, Julia, Monica. So they
Exactly.
okay.
You were saying to you.
Hi, this is Erlien. Where do the PowerPoint that I sent?
On the C platform is like
Can you
find it, or you just want to share on the screen?
Share on the screen.
Okay, so do you have the icon that is called share screen on the left side of the WebEx window?
Yeah.
So if you click on it, there will be
I have to give out the board of facilitation.
yeah. You have an option that is computer, isn't it?
Where is it?
Exa says that you can upload it and then the screen.
Exactly.
Let's share it for where is it?
And this domestic dream one.
This one. Okay. Okay. We can share it from here. So Pierre, I take from the DC platform and I share it from my screen. Okay. You say that you want to show it.
And when you do it, I can also go one slide to the next slide from screen.
Well, you should do it if you want to do it. You should share it yourself.
But I uploaded it. Yep. Okay, then I need to censor right. Says A.
Yes, and that's what I have to give you. Just 1 second, Pierre.
Sharing the screen.
You see it, no?
Yes, I see.
Okay. Now, just 1 second. If I give it to yeah, then I can't share anymore. So I have to share.
You don't. You can.
Yeah, but okay, try then.
Erlien.
Yeah, but I have to go down.
Yeah, Seats also have a presentation. I had to upload it themselves.
Okay, now you have the right of the facilitator. So let's see, just project the PowerPoint and let's see if it works. Yes, the screen. Great. No. Okay. Now you have to project your PowerPoint. No, open your PowerPoint like, okay, that's it is.
Oh, there's a very, sorry to...
No, you have to click the last icon on the very top. That's it. Okay. Okay. So the moment in which you need to start, we're not, if you have the right of facilitators, I can react as a facilitator. So if you don't mind, I would start, and then you have to share your PowerPoint, which I imagine would be after the first question. Then I give you the right. Is that okay?
That's okay. I think that you will have to do the same for Sietse and Augustina because they also have a PowerPoint.
That's no problem. Yeah. At what time do they need the right? I mean, because Tom told me that there would be 3 questions. The first one would be for you, and it's like the introduction and contextualization, or so something like what's domestic family about. And this is, I imagine, is when you project your PowerPoint.
Yeah.
And then we have the other 2 questions, one for Musabayana, for Johnny and Louise, about their experience, and then the other one is about the recurring issues.
Yeah.
Margaret and Agostine, when would they present?
Sietse and Augustina are the last ones.
Great, okay.
But listen, we can just use our PowerPoint from this side to guide through our presentation. It's not necessarily to share now.
Okay, as you prefer. Okay. If you need to share whatever you have on the screen, even a web page, you let me know and I give you the right.
Okay.
Great. So, Erlene, take back the right to me so that we can start the webinar. And I also introduce myself, which I didn't. I apologize, but I do it formally with everyone. Okay? Okay. Okay, we can start. Okay. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning. 9 o'clock here in Zurich, so I think we can start the webinar. We have quite a few participants today. We have Agostine, Aldica, Erlene, Eva, Julia, and Margaret. And also have a participant, which is Carlene. Okay, Carlene. So my name is Monica. You might have read in the email that I'm in Tom this morning. I'm here with Pierre. Maybe already, at least from the email. And yeah, it's a pleasure for me to share this experience with you. I work with Tom in Delta. I've been working here for 14 years already. And it's good to have this experience together. As you know already each other, at least some of you, but it could be good if we do a quick presentation. What do you think? Carla can say anything just as opening. Okay. Some are still settled down, which is good. Hi, Johnny. Good morning.
Просто я уже какое-то время назад участвовала в вебинаре, но я слушала одним ухом, тоже параллельно.
Okay. Good morning. This is hearing me well? Why are you scared? No.
This is
Good. Okay. Good. Who else is online? Could you briefly introduce yourself? We have Johnny. Good morning, Johnny. Can you hear us?
We don't hear him.
You don't hear you. Maybe problem with your microphone.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I see too, and can you hear me? This is Johnny from Pretoria.
Very good. Okay. Nice to meet you. Welcome. And then we have Aziz wrote that she can hear you. She can hear us very well. Agustin.
Hi, this is Agustina and Cita from BAT-CT.
Perfect. Thanks, Agustina.
Hi, Agustina and Cita. This is Johnny.
Hi, Johnny.
Hi. Thanks, guys.
It's also she can hear us. It's good, and Ev as well. Good. Okay. So I have the impression that everyone is listening well. We need few participants, but since it's 9 o'clock, I think we can start. And if they join us, we can welcome them in and we can introduce them to the group. As I was explaining to the group, that my name is Monica Lisa, and I've been working here at the IPCL already for 14 years in Delta. I work with Tom, and for today I will substitute him in this facilitation of this webinar on domestic funding. I'm here with Pierre, who has been working at a distance already in this regional learning journey. Now, as you all know, these webinars are based on a analysis that have been done together with CARDEV and HR. So the funding results is to be one of the things to be explored. We'll be together for about 1 hour 15, 1 hour 30 minutes this morning. We have around 8 people confirmed their participation, but more than that were invited, so more might come at the very last moment. And the webinar will be around the 3 major questions, which we post. And Erlene, I don't know the name, yes, the name, and we also have Margaret and Agustin for the last questions. Now, the first question, which is for Erlene, is about the introduction to domestic funding. It's basically what's domestic funding about. Erlene, do you want to take the mic? I give you the mic so that you can start. Okay? Where is she now? Yeah. Okay. Erlene?
Yes, I can hear you. Could you share the screen?
Yes. I give you the right to you, as we said, so that you can do it yourself. Just 1 second. Okay, good. Okay, Erlene, now you have the right to share.
Okay. This webinar, I'm going to show you what domestic funding is.
You have to open the PowerPoint.
It's open.
It's not working now. It was working 2 minutes ago, but I cannot see it. Can you see it? The other participants can see it. I don't think so.
We can't see it.
No, we cannot see it either.
One share. Do it, please.
Okay, now it's there. Thanks, Erlene. Good, perfect.
Okay, we'll start again. So, I'm going to talk about what domestic funding is, basically. To be able to support the 2030 agenda, we need to make sure that the ILO is well-resourced. And I can tell from the graph, the ILO's current resource base is unbalanced and relies heavily on traditional multi-buy donors. It's a problem because the funding environment is increasingly competitive, while traditional donors are reducing ODA and restricting aid to a more selected group of countries. To end funding, it will be important to diversify the funding base and to pay special attention to member states that have the means to contribute, but so far have not, as well as those that have the potential to contribute more. The scenario whereby the government of a developing country pays the ILO from its own budget to carry a project in its own country, that's what we call domestic funding. Domestic funding can be seen as a step towards self-reliance by the government. And of course, when governments provide their own resources to the ILO, it shows a very clear commitment on their part. In the ILO, domestic funding is most commonly used in upper middle-income countries, in particular in South Africa and Latin America. One of the sources for this webinar is the list of ODA-eligible countries. That's a useful list because it tells you in which country under which income category falls. Keep in mind, though, that while upper middle-income countries may have the biggest potential for resource mobilization, this certainly does not exclude the least developed countries. Least developed countries often receive substantial budget support from, for example, regional banks, which in turn may be allocated to the ILO. Approvals for domestic funding fluctuate tremendously from year to year. As you see from the table, domestic funding peaked in 2008 and 2014 with annual approvals over $60 million. On average, domestic funding counts for about 4.1% of total approvals. And with that, we are lagging behind the rest of the UN. Overall, in the UN, domestic funding counts for no less than 6% of total approvals. ILO's goal is that by 2017, domestic funding counts for 4.9%. We've got work to do. The graph shows approvals by strategic objective, and you can see that most of the funding is allocated to employment issues. We also have a high number of agreements related to social protection, but the amounts per agreement are relatively modest. In the read materials for this webinar, you can also find a detailed overview of domestic funding by country and by technical area. Now, it requires proactive engagement from field officers to build trust with member states to make the case for domestic funding. Our partners go far beyond the ministries of labor. The ILO receives direct support from various ministries, such as ministries of planning, commerce, finance, economic affairs, and ministries of public works. In America, we also have examples of domestic funding from provincial governments. Indirect domestic funding refers to the situation where a portion of a foreign grant or loan, for example from an international financial institute, is transferred to the ILO via the National Treasury. In this context, the ILO recently signed an agreement with the government of the Republic of the Congo, which was in fact a portion of funds that the government had received from the Africa Development Bank. Brazil is a good example of innovative funding. Under Brazilian law, labor prosecutors and judges inflict penalties on violations of labor law, and then go into millions of dollars. The proceeds from these fines don't go to the Treasury, but are assigned to actions to remedy the original cause of the fine. And the nice thing for the ILO is that part of the proceeds of these fines are now allocated to the ILO for remedial action. Now, the crucial question, how do we increase domestic funding? Tapping into domestic resources requires a proactive approach. Still making an analysis of the potential for direct funding and indirect domestic funding, find out under which ODA category a country falls, analyze the sources of funds that the country receives and how these funds are disbursed, and figure out to what extent other UN agencies receive domestic funding and for which policy areas. Are key donors about to give loans or grants? what are the plans of the EC, the World Bank, regional banks? Are there UN funds or other global funds that the government is eligible for? This type of information is crucial to have, and you can find it on the internet or through interviews with key informants. It's equally important to build the trust of the government. A government that is convinced of the technical expertise and the comparative advantages of the ILO, and that has seen examples of results and impact of ILO's work, is more likely to entrust the ILO with its own resources. And development partners, governments expect an evidence-based approach. You can share reports that show how ILO interventions work. You could also, invite key ministries, other than the Ministry of Labour, to major ILO events to start engaging them. Discussions around the development of or the renewal of decent work country programs are a great entry point for exploring how the governments could contribute to the realization of their own decent work outcomes. There's not always a need for the ILO to provide direct support. Costing arrangements, whereby the ILO delivers the technical expertise while the government implements a project, might be an attractive way of working. And with that, I've come to the end of my presentation.
Thank you, that's very interesting. Let me ask the audience, let me ask all the participants in this virtual class if they have questions or want to make comments on your reaction. You all have the microphone active, so feel free to contribute. Yes?
If you have examples where our social partners have contributed.
This is Carlene, isn't that so? Yes. Hi, Carlene. There is a bit of noise. Maybe it's your microphone?
Okay.
So we hear you very far away.
Okay, let me put my question in writing.
Okay, now it's better. If you want to go ahead, now it's better.
Okay, so my question is related to whether there are examples where social partners have contributed to mobilizing domestic development funding.
Yes. Carlene, did you get a question of Carlene?
I did get a question, and at this point, I am not aware of any good examples whereby social partners ensured domestic funding.
Okay. Is there anyone who is aware of this? Anyone who has a feedback for Carlene? No? Yes?
Can reply to one of the questions that we received in writing?
Yes, please.
Yes, one of the questions that we received in writing was about the approval process for domestic funding. And the answer to that one is actually pretty straightforward. The approval process is identical to that for any other type of funding. That means that project documents or concept notes need to be uploaded in SharePoint for appraisal. And for the negotiations of the agreements, we're using a specific template for domestic funding, which is also be uploaded in the resource area. The draft agreements can be submitted to, or must be submitted to PARDEF for clearance. And since I'm responsible for domestic funding, you can send it to me. When the agreement has been cleared, PARDEF will delegate authority to sign the agreement to the office director. And this is a very important point. Field office directors cannot sign an agreement when they have not received this authority to sign. This is crucial because it's something that the external auditors are very specific about and check. Once the agreement has been signed, kindly send the original to PARDEF. Again, this is a requirement of the external auditors. We need to be able to show the originals of signed agreements. Later on in this webinar, Sietse and Augustina will cover some specific issues around agreements.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Erline. Listen, before we move ahead with the second question, I forgot to ask you at the very beginning, would you mind just to tell us where you are based and on what in what department you work?
Sure. I am based in Geneva, and I'm working for PARDEF, where I am responsible for all domestic funding. There's a number of other donors.
Okay, so imagine the participants can contact you if they have further questions later on.
Yes, anytime.
Okay. Thank you, Erline. So now, if there are no other questions for Erline, of course, you can always go back to her within this webinar. I would go ahead with Johnny. Johnny will tell us about his experience in mobilizing domestic funding. Are you alone, or is I just see Ms. Twin, the participants? Are you alone for this facilitation in this webinar?
Yes, I'm alone. I could have brought many more people, but I'm in fact I'm at what we're having a Labour Migration Academy with Turin as well. So I just stepped out of the presentation there to come.
Okay, I see. And just let us know where exactly. I mean, I imagine most of the people already know, but just to be sure where you are based and what you do. What is your main role?
So I'm in Pretoria, South Africa. I'm the director of the Disenrec team and country director of the Disenrec team for Eastern and Southern Africa, and director of the country office for South Africa, Botswana, Lesotho, and Swaziland.
Okay.
So, thank you for having me. We've as a office, been able over quite a sustained period of time to access domestic funding from the South African government. We have also been able to get some limited funds with the Namibian government. Back to South African government, we have the EIP, Employment Intensive Infrastructure Program of the ILO, and in South Africa it's called the Expanded Public Works Program. They have allocated finances to South Africa, to the ILO, 2 projects actually. One is a national project and the other is a provincial project. And the national project is looking at ILO providing policy support, guidance, and tools development for the National Department of Public Works in how to design and implement the Public Works program. The context is that unemployment in South Africa has continued to be very high. It's now around 21% for direct unemployment, and if we add discouraged work seekers, it's around 38-39%. If you look at youth unemployment, it's 60-70%. So this is a direct response to a very pressing challenge that the country is facing. And so the Public Works program is an attempt at a temporary intervention by the state to try to address the issue of unemployment, particularly youth and women unemployment. So a key part of having domestic funding is that the ILO must be directly answering to a very pressing national need that authorities prize as an area of urgent action. And in that regard, the ILO has to demonstrate competence to assist the national authorities in a very specific area. And in this case, at a policy level, but secondly, at a very practical, programmatic and project level. That is why we have a national component looking at policy, and then a policy and design issues, and then we have a national level dealing with a provincial one dealing with actual delivery of public works programs on the ground, normally working with municipal authorities. And we have normally the funding that we are getting is not necessarily for activities. That is done by the local authorities. Ours to provide technical expertise in the conceptualization and design of the public works programs themselves. Then to develop tools to assist in enhancing an employment-intensive approach to the execution of the public works programs. And this we have been successful in doing. We've focused a lot also on measuring the impact or the value add of the ILO. So the issue of documenting impact, documenting the effect of ILO support has been quite key. A major challenge has been to move from these temporary jobs to more permanent work. And there the social partners are very aggressive with the government in the strategy of moving from temporary job opportunities to decent ones. And there the ILO has come up with a three-pronged strategy to assist this, focusing on access to technical skills and then access to work opportunities through the public works program, but also then access the labor market through public employment services, working with public employment services. So this tripartite strategy, if I can call it that, this three-pronged strategy is something that we are now working with the authorities on. The funding itself comes to the IF, it has to go to Geneva, and that has been a sticking point for the authorities. The transaction costs are something that the authorities are not happy with, and we have been discussing with them. So that is the main source of domestic funds. But recently, we've now opened new other avenues, and that has been particularly with National Treasury, a whole project that was largely documenting our experiences in the SME and in the enterprise area. In fact, drawing lessons from projects funded by Flanders, the bilateral manner, and try to synthesize for them to see how that project and the lessons learned there could then be rolled with national funding. We've also managed through a project on sustainable enterprises through responsible, sustainable and competitive and responsible enterprises, looking at worker and management cooperation and enhancing productivity through work and management cooperation. It's a global ILO program called SCORE, and they are getting funding from the provincial authorities in 2 states now. So we had a bilateral funded project by Flanders, and it's now being taken over by the national authorities and rolled out to many other areas. There's quite a lot of scope for expansion in this area. So I just wanted to say there is national funding, but there's also provincial funding at more local levels in the expanded public works program, but also in the enterprise area. In Namibia, the funding was on social protection to do an assessment of the social protection flow by the national government. They provided funding for that assessment. So these are the experiences we had. We have had a lot of dialogue, and I want to thank NCET for Agustina for the support that they've provided us in the process of putting all of this together. And I'm sure NCET will highlight some of the key issues that we have had to overcome to be able to access these funds, not least the issue of a local account the importance of, we are still debating with the one audit principle and these issues, but I'm happy to say we are finding our way to addressing these with the authorities showing a high degree of willingness for give and take. Thank you very much. That's our experience from South Africa.
Okay. Thank you very much, Johnny. This is very much interesting. Let's see if among the participants there are questions or comments.
Colleagues, hello, can you hear me?
Hi, this is Julia.
This is Julia Surina. I'm working in the ILO Moscow office. I just wanted
Sorry,
to...
what's your field of expertise or your department?
Yeah, I will tell you right now. Yeah, I just wanted to share the experience from the ILO Moscow. I'm working for the project on youth employment promotion. The project is implemented in 9 countries of Eastern Europe and Central Asia, and this is an example of the public-private partnership, because the project is implemented with the financial support of the Russian oil company, which is called Lukoil. So this is one of the, I would say, unique examples in our organization, and the first Russian company that entered into partnership with the ILO. So just, I was just listening to Johnny's experience. That's why I decided to contribute with this information. Actually, I have a lot to say about the project. We have a lot of interesting experience of cooperation with the government, and we see that many of the measures that were supported by us are already institutionalized by the government, and the governments are contributing with their own resources to further implement the measures that we piloted, that we tested together. We'll have time, I think, during the webinar to talk about this in details, but I just wanted to let you know that we are promoting very much exchange of experiences between the countries that we cover, and so we promote the sharing of experience outside of our sub-region. So just wanted, using this opportunity, to say that in January we will organize a big sub-regional event on youth employment promotion in the Turin Center. And besides our countries of Eastern Europe and Central Asia, we would like to incorporate the element of BRICS. Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. So just knowing that Johnny is with us now, I just wanted to say personally to him that we will come back to him with a letter with the invitation of inviting South African Ministry of Labor this event. And yeah, I hope that they will accept our invitation. So thank you much, and if you are interested in our experiences, I would, if we have time, I would say in more details.
Okay. Thank you very much, Julia, for sharing with us your experience, what's happening within your region, and to tell us about this event. Any other comments?
Maybe can I ask Julia to give me her surname so we can take up the discussion on email?
Yeah. Come back to you by email, okay, Johnny?
Okay, I'll look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay. I can see that in the chat we have a question from Aya. Actually, just a tip: when you use the chat, you have to make sure, if you want that everyone sees your question, you have to ensure that when it says send it to, you select everyone. Otherwise, it stays flat as a question. In any case, the question from Aya is, let me tell you that Aya is is based in Delhi. And the question is, hello, is there a place on the internet where we can review the project documents that utilizes domestic funding? Domestic funding is usually to cover some components of the project or the full project. Would it cover staff cost, like international and national staff? Anyone who wants to answer to this question? Maybe,
yes, I can answer it from South Africa.
Yes, please.
We're happy to share the project documents on the public program in South Africa. If we get the email address, we can send it to the colleague. But a specific question, Yeah, in fact, most of the funding is not on activities. It is a staff cost. So the domestic funding for the public program is going direct to staff costs. So we have, I think, a team of staff members, both in the national capital, but also in the provinces. All of them funded by the African government. And so the input of the ILO into public works program is technical expertise. It's largely technical expertise. The for the activities is national authorities. Our colleagues' job is to provide the expertise in the utilization of those national funds. So that's a clear demarcation between activity funding in the budgets of the national authorities and the technical expertise provided by ILO, funded by the South African government. But that's not a public works program. They also experience working in the tourism sector with the project. There, the fund is not for staff, which are funded by Flanders. The funding is more for the upskilling of the activities to areas which are not currently covered by the project itself. So we have two experiences. In the one project, the funding for technical expertise with national funding by the national authorities. In the other project, it's providing funding for the upscaling of activities and deepening of activities, but the funded for now the donor. Now, where we are in negotiation is that project ends June this year, staff costs for the tourism project, and then we are in dialogue with the national authorities to see how the authorities can take over those staff costs. So these two distinct experiences, national staff and national funding for activities with co-funding from the donor. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks for this clarification. Any other question? If you want, for those who didn't join the other webinar, when you want to speak, you have to unmute your microphone. When the microphone appears red, it means that we cannot hear you. So put it to gray again if you want to speak. If there are not other questions, I would like to ask for a clarification. At a certain point, you said that within your domestic funding, actually you use the funds for technical advice, so basically to fund the technical expertise and not any activities. I just wanted to know if, in general, in South Africa, but also in the other countries within Europe, it is the government that decides the purpose of the use, or there is a space for the ILO to negotiate on that?
Okay. Thank you, Monica. No, this is always a dialogue with the national authorities. When we use domestic funding, the lines of communication with the national authorities have been very strong. I don't say that when we use bilateral funds, they are not strong, but it is almost a prerequisite. And the authorities are in a very strong position to define exactly what kind of support they are looking for from the ILO. So if ever was a situation where this demand-driven approach were exercised in practice, it is definitely in the situation when you are using domestic funding. But having said that, it's also a relationship of trust, and they will listen when they make proposals. They are going to discuss and what our proposals are. But for the most part, I would say they are more in the driving seat and saying, ILO, these are the issues, these are the areas where we need you, this is the support we need. And with that, we could then say, could you look at this issue? Could you consider that issue? But largely dialogue driven by themselves. But let me, while I have the floor, Monica, also just add another experience which
Yes,
which is
please.
new. We are working on. Because of a project on SMEs, we've come up with an SME database. We've piloted in 2 provinces in South Africa. The national authorities now, the National Department of Small Business, which is the Minister of Small Business Development, has become very excited by this database, and they want to roll it out as a national tool throughout the rest of the country. And in particular case, approached the EU, and our support developed a proposal to the EU, and been allocated 8 million euro for the rollout of this SME database. They now come back to us, and I was in dialogue with them to see what percentage of that 8 million could be allocated to ILO for us to support them in the national rollout. So this is a debate that we are currently engaged in, to see how funds that have been allocated to them by a multilateral donor EU can then channel withdraw themselves to the ILO. And that is some quote-unquote type of domestic funding as I outlined in the introduction. And we are looking forward to accessing that one also.
Okay. Yes, interesting. Thanks for sharing this case as well. Just for you to know, in the chat, we have few requests. Actually, make sure you see the chat just by clicking it. There is a question for, or request from Margaret to Julia. Where the project documents are shared, please include me in the exchange, because we would be interested from an internet and China perspective. And then we also have another question for you, Johnny, from Margaret. Have the tripartite constituents, like for example, Labour Ministry, employers and workers, been key partners in the dialogue? Or is it more bilateral between the ILO and the ministries?
That's a very good
If you want
question.
to add anything, I give you the Turner, Ray, your mic. Yeah, great. Yes.
Oh, I can't hear anything anymore. I can hear you, Monica, but not much else.
Okay. Actually, I was the only one speaking, and then there was a background discussion, I guess,
Oh.
that I took out, putting the mic on red. I had a question for John in the chat. It was about the negotiation and the dialogue between ILO. You were asking if the other part were mainly the ministries, or if the 3 constituents are equally involved. Is that correct? Do you want to add anything to your question?
No, that was pretty much it.
Okay. Johnny, would you like to answer Margaret?
Hi, Petra. Thanks for the question, Margaret. No, there is no. The partners, the employer and workers, are not involved in the discussion at all. There's largely a dialogue between the law and the responsible line ministry. And I'm jumping there by saying line ministry because you've also asked if the Ministry of Labor is involved. Yes, I'm involved. And the Ministry of Labor is not a key participant in the dialogue. In the case of the project on public works, we are dealing with the National Public Works Ministry directly and keep the Ministry of Labor involved. We have to keep the ILO constituents involved because all the work that we do in the country is to the National Tripartite Social Dialogue Institution called NEDLAC. So we can't undertake any activity in South Africa without going to our traditional partners. About it and having a dialogue about it, and also more importantly showing how it fits within the country program that has been signed for. So that ensures always that any activities undertaken carry their constituents with us, but they are not necessarily sitting on the table when we are doing the negotiation. They have to raise key strategic questions about the design of the project, the expected outcomes and outputs of the project, and decent work elements of the project, and also we safeguard against, let's say, under reinforcing labor law, the legislation. These are issues that they ask at the tripartite forum, but then we will proceed to go to the dialogue with the line ministry directly. This is true whether we're discussing at the national level with the National Department of Public Works or we're to the provinces. In this, the social partners and the mixed labor make inputs at a strategic level when we send the concept note, but they not come to the negotiating table itself.
Okay. I'm just thinking of this in terms of DWCPs, because in the region we have quite a few being formulated, and I haven't read the South Africa one. I will go and have a look at it, but I was just wondering how you've reflected this domestic funding strategy in source mobilization plan or the funding plan. Is that something that is discussed upfront when the DWCP is formulated? Because the tendency, and we're to change that, the tendency is to have those initial discussions with the Ministry of Labour and the social partners. Depending on whether you have or whether we have projects that link with other ministries, the dialogue for DWCPs tend to be somewhat restricted. So I was wondering if you had, you encountered any issues when developing the DWCP and discussing a domestic fund strategy.
That's the real answer is the formulation of the DWCP is, first, context is important. So we have a gazetted tripartite social dialogue structure called the National Economic Development and Labour Administration Center and Net Council. That's a tripartite body funded by the state. It's a within-time secretariat and is running on the basis of 4 chambers: the Labour Chamber, the Trade Chamber. It has, and all these other line ministries participate. And in fact, you would have 5 national ministries participating. And we had a subcommittee, a tripartite plus subcommittee, tech committee, which has been formed only for the Decent Work Country program. So we are in the process of doing a second generation DWCP, and that tripartite plus subcommittee is in effect. And the input of the other line ministries is through the Ministry of Labour, and that draft DWCP is taken to Cabinet and it is presented in Parliament. And there, Ministry of Labour has to give an update on the implementation of the Decent Work Country program to Cabinet and to Parliament. That ensures that all the ministries that are involved, they become part of the DW implementation process. But at formulation stage, the advisors make the inputs through the Ministry of Labour. By execution stage, we are then free to go to each of the line ministries for the implementation of different elements. And funding issue, more when we're at the implementation, so we put a clear division between the definition of work in the DWCP versus the funding of the work at implementation level. So there are different modalities for funding different parts of the work, but they are discussed at the execution stage, and that's where we are going to the different line ministries for the implementation of the DWCP itself. I hope that helps. Yeah.
Very helpful. Thanks.
Thank you, Johnny, and thanks also for the questions. Now, if there are no other questions for Johnny, would move ahead with the third question, which, if I'm not wrong, will be facilitated by Margaret and Agostina, and recurring issues. So what's happening when this is negotiation for domestic funding, when negotiating agreements for domestic funding? What are the recurrent challenges, and what are the advice you could give? Margaret, shall I give the floor to you? Margaret,
Hello?
can you hear me?
It's Sitza and Agostina.
Okay, because in my agenda had another. Okay, this is good. So shall I give the floor to Sitza?
Yes. So good morning, everybody. I'm Sitza Buyser from BudCT, and I'm joined by Augustina. She is the one who, in general, deals the most with domestic funding in CT. So here to some additional feedback if required. So for domestic funding, the ILO came up with a standard domestic funding agreement, and we very strongly encouraged everybody to use this standard agreement. And why do I say that? If we need to clear these agreements, it's easier and much quicker if you will be using the standard agreement. Now, I'm not going to go through a few points, what we have seen over the last years and months. What differs if you don't use the standard agreements? Now, one item that we often find is pre-financing. The ILO has a rule that the ILO cannot pre-finance any activity, which the ILO should have received the money before we can spend it. Agreements that are not standard, we will see that the budget and the payment schedule are not in line, which actually means is that when the ILO should be spending the money, the ILO is actually paying it first. Now, the ILO doesn't have its own money, the money that comes from other donors. So it makes it very difficult and very lengthy to clear these agreements. Now, another one that I have, and I think through all the meetings that have taken place in the past, this question comes up, is the program support cost. Standard program support cost for the ILO is 13%. This is for domestic funding. There is no special rate for domestic funding. Some colleagues think there is a lower rate, but it is still 13%. And we strongly encourage you to keep this. You know, overall PSI is going down, there is less money to be distributed. This is a source of income that is really important for the ILO. If it is absolutely not possible to stick to the 13%, you have to submit a waiver to the Treasury or to the Chief of BudFin to request a waiver, to request a lower rate. This needs to be done to make any commitments to the donor. We in us come back when it's a done deal. It's a blessing for the ILO, and it is causing problems with other donors. That the donors who pay the 30%, we even have examples of donors who pay more than 13%, one paying more than the others. So that's why it is so important that we stick to the 13%. And Johnny already mentioned it, so my next one is the single audit principle. What does the single audit principle mean is the ILO can only be audited by its internal audit of external auditors, which is currently the Filipinos. And a project can be audited on request of donor of the project as long as they finance it, and we come up with terms of reference of what our external auditor should look at. Now, we've seen in the past that if we move away from the standard domestic funding agreement, they put in their own audit clauses, and this is something that is not acceptable. Other UN agencies, with no exception, does follow the single order principle, and we have to stick to that. So the ILO does not make any exceptions on this. We also have seen in the financial statements. Again, we try to keep them standard. This is important for the ILO because you have many, many different donors. If everybody would come with their own format, it would become impossible for funds to, use all those different kinds of statements. Our statements, we encourage that they are based on the ILO calendar year, which is from the 1st of January till the 31st of December. Now, there are governments and there are other donors that have their financial year starts on the 1st of April and runs till the 31st of March. Again, we encourage that we ILO financial year, and one of the reasons is we close our accounts as of the 5th of December. So we can provide to the donors a very clear statement for a year where no changes can be made. Often, but we have seen it, that clauses on how we should administer the funds have changed. We can only administer the funding coming from donors with our written rules, directive, and procedures. We cannot adhere to the rules of the donor. We can follow the ILO regulation, rules, directives, and procedures. And again, when we move away from the standards, we often see this as points that it is a lot of back and forwards between the donor and the ILO. Over years, it seems that there are more and more a requirement for ILO in contribution. We are recently in Latin America, where ILO has to contribute half of the total budget as an in-kind contribution. This, in my opinion, should be avoided as much as possible. Our contribution can come from another project, so we can order project as the ILO in-kind contribution, and we receive anything from that donor, that no objection. Then we have other points come up. If you have in-kind contribution, should it be included in the financial statements? If there is an audit, should it be included in audit? And this makes it often difficult for owners to accept that the contribution they made to the ILO could be an in-kind contribution to another project. Again, if you avoid it, it should be avoided, because it causes a lot of issues. In-kind contribution is in the form of staff cost. You have to document through timesheets exactly how much time each staff member spent. Even you don't need to report on it to the donor. Even audited by our external auditors, and we can audit it basically year-round. They can ask to prove that ILO did indeed contributed. So any in-kind contribution should be documented and saved and readily available in case of an audit. Now, we have seen increasing over the last few years as well, and this is becoming a bigger and bigger concern, is we sign agreements. We can sign agreements in any currency. So I don't say we cannot sign in Colombian pesos or in Indian rupiahs or Indonesian rupiahs. We can sign in any currency. What needs to be done the funds need to be sent to the bank account in Geneva. The reason is the way the ILO manages this money. If money stays in the field, especially in local bank accounts, we have a huge risk of exchange rate losses. And it's very recently, I think it happened in November, where the Egyptian pound halved, if I remember correctly. So the ILO, the local currencies, exchange rate drop, that the strength against the dollar drops, the ILO loses an incredible amount of money. And therefore, it needs to store in Geneva in our accounts, which are either dollars, euros, or Swiss francs, which are more stable. Okay. This is possible, and I think it should always be possible, but if not, you need to receive written approval from the Treasury Department before going into any agreement with the donor. This is done before the agreement is signed, before anything is negotiated. You prefer a commit before you get the written approval. Okay, and there have been cases where the Treasury has denied because they also look at your cash flow in the office. We have to reduce the exchange rate risk for the ILO. We are here to try and protect the ILO. It's a little bit the next point with what I said about pre-financing. I've seen agreements for very small amounts with payments. This is not acceptable. This is very heavy for ILO at very high cost. So we should reduce the number of payments as much as possible. But definitely, if I have a contribution of $50,000 and 50 payments is not acceptable. Again, that is where your negotiation skills have to kick in and really try to convince the donor to be active, to be, we get preferable everything up front. I think this is I think for BudCT the most common points that we have seen over the last few years going wrong. So if anyone has any question, please shoot, and we'll try to answer them.
Thanks. Let's see if there are questions.
Hello, Monica.
Yes,
I just have
Margaret.
one comment also to support what Sitza was talking about in terms of receiving funds up front. In terms of staffing, if we're the best, the best staff, and be able to provide that technical support and, maintain our credibility, then we need the funds up front as far as possible so that we can contract people accordingly. Otherwise, we have great difficulties in actually delivering on what we promise.
Yes, Margaret, for pointing that out. You're absolutely right. Because in certain cases, we have to limit the funds received. And you're absolutely right. When it is funds received, the content ILO can provide are often not the tracks. So thank you for pointing that out.
Sis, maybe you said that and I missed it, but just as a reminder, because you were actually listing a different step, what colleagues have to do when negotiating an agreement. Are there written guidelines people can consult when they have to negotiate an agreement?
I think what is the best is the ILO in part. Yeah, you said it together. Part of finance and Jure has come up with standard agreements. With standard agreements for donors, we have a standard agreement for domestic funding. In my opinion, this should be the starting point.
Okay.
Yes, all the clauses by three parties. If there are no changes to the agreement, we basically can clear the agreement within half an hour. As soon as you move away from those standard clauses, this is when the problem starts, because those clauses are the ones to protect the ILO. So if they are different, it's difficult. Finance has to step in, Jura has to step in.
Okay.
You can find the standard agreements, including those for direct trust funds, on the internet site of Part F. And of course, if you have any questions, you can always call us or email us.
Thanks. Okay. If there are not other questions for Sietse, I'd like to see if Agustina, would you like to complement on contribution?
Oh, thank you. He's covered it pretty well. Yeah.
Okay. Good. Let me see if we have question. Well, you might have noticed it. Johnny had to leave, so he said goodbye in the chat. He told me to say goodbye to everyone. He will be back for the next webinar we have with Africa with 30 minutes. Let's see again. Are there any particular question for Agustin and Sietse related to the negotiation of agreements? Any doubts or needs for clarification? Very clear, huh? So
Thank you.
no questions.
So I can see all the new agreements coming through. They will be perfectly in order. So I'm very happy. Okay, thank you.
Thank you to you both. Just as a recap, you are both based in Geneva, isn't that so?
That is correct, yes.
Okay, good. And we are getting to the end of this webinar, but we have 10 minutes before we close. So this is a question I have basically for Erline, but also for the other facilitator, mainly Sietse, Agustina, and Johnny already left. So, but also if Margaret or anyone else wants to add anything, but it's about the final word you would have for domestic funding. Major messages, Erline, you would like to recap for our participants?
Proactive approach towards mobilizing domestic funding. Build that relationship with the government that also Joni underlined is crucial and a precondition for mobilizing domestic funding. And in terms of practical issues, the contract negotiations, the budget clearance, clearance of the project documents, I can only say keep us informed, involve us in the process early on. I mean, the earlier we are involved, the easier it will be to, solve any possible obstacles. And also don't hesitate to share good experiences with us, because that would help everybody in the ILO.
Okay. And they you
Okay, due to bandwidth.
the plan.
Coming up, there's one last point that I wanted to make. As of next week, I think shortly before Christmas, we will also have a screencast on domestic funding. So if you would like to, listen to all of this information at your own pace again, I would recommend listening to the screencast.
Okay. That you. Hello. Hello.
Okay, let me just give the last words from Budget T. I think actually Erling just took all the words that I wanted to say. Involve us as early as possible.
Yes.
Because that will, if there are changes, this will avoid a lot of frustration. And, it's better to raise the question before than, we have to backtrack with the donors afterwards.
on the just retain
МОД, генеральный директор для стран Европы и Центральной Азии.
all of you now.
Yeah, we can hear you again.
Yes. Okay.
Monica, it's very difficult to hear you. I think we can start from here. Good indications have been given for further up reading. You can always contact Erlene and Sietse if you need specific tailored requests. So thanks for participating to all, and let's grow the domestic funding portfolio. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.